Hello, dear students. Today we will continue with the topic of circulatory system. So in the last video, we had compiled the portion of composition of blood, that the blood is composed of plasma and of formed elements. The formed elements are the RBCs, the erythrocytes, WBCs, the leukocytes, and the platelets, the thrombocytes. So today we will continue about the plasma and the RBCs. So let's start. So plasma is the liquid part of the blood. It forms roughly 55 to 60% of the blood. When blood is allowed to clot in a test tube, the RBCs and the WBCs and the platelets settle down. The liquid part which remains above is called as plasma. So this plasma is alkaline in nature. Okay, its pH is slightly, it is this plasma which is responsible for the pH of blood. It is a yellow colored liquid, and 90 to 92% of this liquid is nothing but water. So majority of this liquid is water. It has 7 to 8% proteins. It has 1% inorganic salts, and most of the inorganic salts happen to be sodium chloride, sodium bicarbonate, which are also responsible for its alkaline nature. It also has certain other elements, other components like glucose, amino acids, fibrinogen, hormones, urea, etc. Now, fibrinogen is a soluble protein which is responsible for blood clotting. This is a very important protein required in the mechanism of clotting of blood. Blood from which fibrinogen has been removed, the blood plasma from which the protein fibrinogen has been removed, is called as serum. Okay, it is this serum which is collected when people have to collect something for vaccination purposes. So we will be studying about serum later on also. Now we have the first formed element, the red blood cells. The red blood cells have two components. Number one is hemoglobin, and the second one is stroma. Now the hemoglobin is the red pigment which is present in case of the RBCs. The RBCs are a membrane-bound structure, and the spongy substance in between is called as stroma. Now, this hemoglobin of the RBCs is basically a component made up of iron, which has bonded with various other elements and formed a heme group, and along with this, protein-based globin molecules. The globin molecules are in form of two chains, alpha chains and beta chains. So these chains will collectively form the globin structure. So the collective name comes as hemoglobin. So heme part gives the name hemo, and globin molecule gives the remainder of the part, hemoglobin. So it is this structure which is best suited for transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, when hemoglobin combines with oxygen, it forms a compound called oxyhemoglobin. This oxyhemoglobin is bright red in color. This normally takes place when blood reaches the lungs and gives away carbon dioxide and takes in oxygen. So this oxygen-rich blood is bright red in color. The second one, this is deoxygenated, which is dark red. This is carbaminohemoglobin. This is formed when hemoglobin combines with carbon dioxide to form carbaminohemoglobin. Amongst oxyhemoglobin and carbaminohemoglobin, carbaminohemoglobin is more stable and oxyhemoglobin is unstable. The reason why this needs to be unstable is so that it can readily give its oxygen to the tissues when they require it for the process of respiration. Now, sometimes what happens is if a person is exposed to an environment which is deficient in oxygen, but maybe in a crowded room or where a coal fire is burning, due to which the carbon dioxide of the air has changed into carbon monoxide, then carbon monoxide poisoning results. Now, carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas, which is 200 times more stable in forming a compound with hemoglobin. So it has more affinity to combine with hemoglobin than oxygen. So amongst the three compounds of hemoglobin, carboxyhemoglobin, which is hemoglobin combined with carbon monoxide, is the most stable, and oxyhemoglobin is the least stable. So if you have all these gases, carbon monoxide in air, carbon dioxide in air, oxygen in air, hemoglobin is most likely to combine with carbon monoxide, leading to a condition called carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning are headache, nausea, breathlessness. A person may even collapse or may feel dizzy, and then there may be loss of consciousness. If not treated or found out well in time, carbon monoxide poisoning can lead to death. Survival is possible by making a person inhale a carbogen mixture. A carbogen mixture is a mixture of 95% oxygen and 5% carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide poisoning is most dangerous because this gas has no smell or odor. So it is very difficult to diagnose. So a room having poor ventilation is most probable cause for carbon monoxide poisoning, and especially if it is overcrowded. So you must ensure that you are in a place where ventilation is good and the carbon monoxide is therefore not accumulated. Now we have the mature RBCs. One thing about RBCs that should know that RBCs are a structure or a kind of cell which has a nucleus when they are young. But the moment they become mature, these RBCs lose three cell organelles. Three of them are selectively lost. The first one which they lose is the nucleus. When they lose the nucleus, this gives them a very small size. Now, small size would give large surface area to volume ratio, which will increase the functional qualities of the RBCs. The RBCs can be accommodated in the same space in a larger number. It can enable rapid diffusion of gases from the cell. It increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the hemoglobin present in the RBCs. So overall, it increases the functional efficiency of RBCs. The second organelle which it does not have is the endoplasmic reticulum. Not having the endoplasmic reticulum makes it more flexible, due to which it can easily pass through the small capillaries. Now, it does not have any mitochondria. Now, mitochondria are called as the powerhouse of a cell. Mitochondria use up oxygen. Lacking mitochondria doesn't allow the oxygen being carried by hemoglobin of the RBCs to be used by the RBCs. So RBCs cannot use the oxygen that they are carrying, and this oxygen can be readily transported. So they become best suited for transportation of oxygen. The second thing, the glucose which is present inside will not be used up. Glucose which is present in the blood plasma will not be used up. So the mitochondria simply act as a vehicle transporting oxygen from one to the other structure. Now, RBCs on maturity lose these organelles to acquire a biconcave structure. This structure enables them to perform their functions better with increased efficiency. Now, you need to know about the life and death of RBCs. The RBCs are produced in bone marrow of long bones, especially the bones of ilium of hip girdle. This blue structure is the ilium, the breastbone or the sternum, and the ribs. These are the three primary areas where they are produced in large numbers. In an embryo, when the child is still inside the mother's womb, the RBCs are produced in liver and in spleen. In children below 5 years, they're produced in bone marrow of all bones. After that, it specifies itself and it's shifted to the long bones, but before that, all bones which are present in their body, they will be producing large number of RBCs. It is because RBC requirement of children is much more than in case of adults. They are more active, their metabolic rate is higher, so they require more number of RBCs. And their lifespan is 120 days. So after 120 days, RBCs die. But the only thing is all RBCs do not die at one single time. Their death occurs like human population has varied ages, so their ages of RBCs is also varied. So they die at different age groups. Mature RBCs, as you have already done, have no endoplasmic reticulum, have no mitochondria, have no nucleus. And they are destroyed in three different structures, three different parts of the body. Number one is spleen, number two is liver, and number three is the bone marrow. So RBCs are formed in bone marrow, they're also destroyed in bone marrow. And 1% of total erythrocytes, that means total RBCs, are destroyed every day. 1% of whatever amount of RBCs we have in the body, they are destroyed on a daily basis. Now, next, you need to know the blood cell formation. Now, how are these cells formed in the body? Inside the bone marrow, we have the blood stem cells. Stem cells are those cells which have the capacity to change into various kinds, like meristematic tissues in plants. They are capable of forming other types of cells. Same way, stem cells retain the capacity to divide and change into various categories of blood cells. So all the formed elements, the RBCs, the WBCs, and the platelets, they can be formed by the stem cells. They are present in the bone marrow. Now, these stem cells form the myeloid stem cells. These are formed in the bone marrow, and they will be distributing and dividing themselves and changing further after differentiation into the red blood cells and the platelets, and a category of white blood cells which are called as granulocytes. Granulocytes means their cytoplasm is granular. It has got grainy texture. So these are formed in the bone marrow. The stem cells can further also divide into lymphoid stem cells. These stem cells have a capacity to later on move into lymph tissues, lymph glands, especially the spleen, especially the thymus, and they will form another category of WBCs, which are generally called as agranulocytes. Agranulocytes means their cytoplasm has no grainy structures. They are B lymphocyte, T lymphocyte, and natural killer cell. B lymphocytes are the ones which remain and mature in the bone marrow itself. T lymphocytes are those which mature in the thymus, that is one type of lymphoid tissue, lymphoid gland. And the natural killer cells, they remain in a dormant state. They readily become active when they encounter any pathogen in the body. So these are the basic categories of the blood cells which are formed from the stem cells in the body. So we basically are going to focus on the red blood cells here. The remainder of these, the remaining, we will be continuing in the next video also. So at present, we are going to focus on the red blood cells, which are formed in the bone marrow by the stem cells. Now, these red blood cells, you need to know about them that when newborns are, a child is born, they have more number of RBCs. Their RBC count is higher. Their energy requirement is higher. A newborn baby's heart beats much faster. A newborn baby's body temperature is much higher. A newborn is adjusting, having neural connections being made. Memory is pretty fast. He or she is picking up new words, picking up and identifying people around. So they require a larger amount of metabolism in the body. So that means more RBCs are required for them. RBC count is lowered by 5% during sleep. When we sleep, the body is at that particular time, the death of RBCs occurs. So at that time, therefore, the RBC count goes low. RBC count increases during pregnancy, emotional upsets, or physical activity. When a female is pregnant, she has to have more energy requirement for the growing fetus inside her. That means the RBC count needs to increase. When somebody is emotionally upset, at that time, the heart pumps more blood, the bone marrow will be forming more RBCs to counter the environmental, the emotional disturbance which has been created. The physical activity increases the RBC count because when you're exercising, the body requires more RBCs to provide more oxygen to the lungs, to the muscles which are being used for the physical activity. Therefore, the RBC count increases. Now, another thing about RBC count is when people live in hilly areas, amount of oxygen present in the atmosphere is less. So the RBCs have to be higher to absorb whatever amount of oxygen is available to them. So RBC count is much higher for people living in hilly areas. Abnormal increase of RBCs is called as polycythemia. Abnormal decrease of RBCs is called as erythropenia. So these are the two defects associated with the abnormal increase or abnormal decrease of RBCs. So we have the combined properties of RBCs, that the newborns have more RBCs. The RBC count is lower by 5% during sleep. RBC count increases during pregnancy, emotional upsets of physical activity. People living in hilly areas have more RBCs, and abnormal increase is polycythemia. Abnormal decrease is called as erythropenia. So these RBCs are required for transportation of oxygen also and carbon dioxide also in the capillaries. Now, when the artery carrying oxygen from the lungs comes and distributes that blood into a capillary, the capillary has one single layer of endothelium over itself. On this structure, because of this structure, exchange of gases, of nutrients takes place. So the blood gives its oxygen to the body cells. The nutrients are also given to the body cells, and in return, carbon dioxide is taken from the body cells, waste material is taken, and this blood now reaches through the capillary into the vein. The veins will be carrying it into the heart, and heart will then be again pumping it to the lungs for oxygenation. So this function is brought about by capillaries and the blood combined. Now, how transportation of oxygen is done by hemoglobin? When the blood from the lungs comes, this blood is rich in oxygen. It is oxyhemoglobin. This oxygen-rich blood comes to the tissues. In the tissues, this oxygen-rich blood, the oxyhemoglobin will immediately release its oxygen because oxyhemoglobin is very unstable. When it releases its oxygen, in place of oxygen, it will start taking carbon dioxide from the tissue because carbon dioxide forms carb-aminohemoglobin, which is much more stable than oxyhemoglobin. So carbon dioxide is carried by this RBC into the lungs for oxygenation purposes. That means oxygen-rich blood comes to the tissues, gives its oxygen, and ultimately takes carbon dioxide and reaches the lungs. Now, you might wonder that the veins which are carrying carbon dioxide would be completely deoxygenated. Remember that veins do not have completely deoxygenated blood. Complete amount of oxygen cannot be removed from the veins. Inside the lungs, when the blood comes, the hemoglobin becomes 97 to 99% saturated with oxygen. That means when exchange of gases is taking place in the lungs, only 97 to 99% of saturation of hemoglobin takes place with oxygen. Some amount of carbon dioxide is still present in the lungs, in the capillaries surrounding the lungs. When this blood reaches the tissues, the hemoglobin releases only 23% of oxygen. That means of the 97 to 99% of oxygen, the hemoglobin only releases 23% oxygen. That means venous blood still has about 75% oxygen. So the venous blood, though it is dark red in color, it is not completely devoid of oxygen. It still has 75% oxygen as compared to the arterial blood, which has got 97 to 99% oxygen. Now, you must remember that the RBC count in case of any person is roughly 6 to 7 million cubic millimeter. Okay, 6 to 7 million per cubic millimeter. That's the RBC count for a normal individual. So this RBC count is able to maintain 97 to 99% of saturation of hemoglobin, which is a large amount of oxygen available to the cells. So these cells will be using this oxygen for carrying out their various activities, and in turn will be giving out carbon dioxide. So in this way, the carbon dioxide rich blood goes via the vein to the lungs for oxygenation to continue with this cycle. So that's all we are going to do about the RBCs now. In the next video, we will be doing more about WBCs. Hope you have understood this topic. So make sure to revise this topic again. Thank you very much. God bless you all.